What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet. And if you're wondering, wait a minute, he looks a little under the weather. You're not wrong, because I feel a little under the weather, and I figured, well, I might as well look it. That and I just recently moved, and I'm not exactly sure where my razor is. So there's that. Anyway, today we are going to be talking more Kamigawa Neon Dynasty spoilers. So that is... We're in the midst of spoiler season. We've seen the majority of the set at this point, and I gotta say, it looks like straight gasoline. I cannot wait to get my hands on this set. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. And today, I want to talk about a card that has certain potential and has people kind of going, is this good? Is this bad? I'm not exactly sure. But it's flashy. It looks like it's going to be a commander staple and has the potential to produce some interesting janky brews that could really hose different archetypes. And I'm looking forward to giving it a shot. And that card is none other than the one, the only Jin Gitaxias Progress Tyrant. So Jin Gitaxias is an interesting card. It is a 5/5 Phyrexian Praetor. It is legendary for 5 blue. And it says, whenever you cast an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy, and this ability triggers only once each turn. And a copy of a permanent becomes a token. So if you were to copy an artifact with this, it would come into play as a token. Rad. So that alone is worth the price of admission, but wait, there's more. Whenever an opponent casts an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, counter that spell. This ability triggers only once each turn. So I love the design on this card, and as a complement to the Vorinclex that we saw in Kaldheim, it actually fits very, very nicely, because the Vorinclex that we saw in Kaldheim had this ability where it would double any counters that you put on your permanents or opposing players, but any permanents that they put on any permanents, or any counters that they put on permanents or players would be halved, rounded down, if I'm not mistaken. Rounded up? No, it was rounded down. So one just became 0. It was brutal. And so the idea of, I'm going to make my counter strategy twice as effective, and I'm going to make your counter strategy half as effective. Jin Gitaxias has the exact same mentality. This idea of, I'm going to make my artifact or spell slinging strategy twice as effective by doubling the first spell I cast each turn of those types, and I'm going to make your strategy that relies on artifacts, instants, and sorceries half as effective by countering the first one that you cast every single turn. It's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. Now, the criticisms that I hear of this card are, would I rather play Jin Gitaxias or Hullbreaker Horror? The answer to that is very, very simple. Hullbreaker Horror. The card is so much better. There's not even you can't even compare the two. Hullbreaker Horror is a house, and it's absolutely untouchable, especially in a format like Standard, where it still can't be countered. It still does all the things that you want. It's an incredibly powerful card. It's a 7-drop. Actually, it has the exact same mana cost, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, at the end of the day, as your control finisher, Jin Gitaxias is not going to get you there. However, in a deck that is capable of reanimating or cheating things into play in other ways, that doesn't necessarily have a high concentration of instant speed interactions like bounce spells and counter spells like Hullbreaker Horror really thrives on, Jin Gitaxias all of a sudden is looking like a pretty sweet option. So being able to pull Jin Gitaxias up, and then especially if you're going up in like historic, where artifact decks are fairly common and will probably only become more common as Kamigawa rolls out, because there are a lot of great equipment and other artifacts in Kamigawa. So Jin Gitaxias shuts a lot of that down pretty hard if you can get it onto the field relatively early. Because that's the thing about Jin. Jin Gitaxias is not a win condition. It is a stacks piece. This card is designed to lock out a particular element of your opponent's game plan. If you can get Jin Gitaxias online alongside, say, Toxrill or Elishnorn, or Massacre Worm, or one of these other creatures that makes it very difficult for your opponent to play creatures, all of a sudden, you have a stacks lockout on a couple of big bodies that can beat your opponent to death. so you can lock your opponent out of the game effectively. Now, that said, with Jin Gitaxias, you don't stop all instants and sorceries. You only stop the first one each turn, which I think is an elegant way to give everyone an out. You can play around it. It doesn't stop you from playing instants and sorceries completely. It doesn't do that, unfortunately, in my opinion. Not that I would be upset if it did, but as the person who wants to reanimate this, put this in a deck with Assemble from Parts and Return Upon the Tide, I want to get this card into play on turn 3 or turn 4, and in so doing, and Priest of Felrights. How do I forget the Priest of Felrights? This card has an opportunity to be really disgusting, and that's beautiful. I think this could be a great piece of one of those types of scenarios. It also will work best in situations where you have lots of instant sorceries. Like, could you imagine filling your graveyard with various mill strategies, like, your Undead Butlers, your old Stick Fingers, getting your graveyard full, and then casting a Return Upon the Tide or an Edgar's Awakening or some other, or Unburial Rites. I mean, name a reanimation spell, and then doubling it. So all of a sudden, I'm gonna get Jin Gitaxias out first with my Priest of Felrights. Then I'm gonna Unburial Rites a Sheoldred. Oh, and this Elishnorn's coming along for the ride too. Or this Urabrask is coming up too, just cause. Or original Jin Gitaxias, who messes with hand sizes, like all kinds of stuff. The opportunities for shenanigans in the kind of deck that can leverage Jin Gitaxias Progress Tyrant is going to be fun and interesting. Now, are these going to be competitively viable decks? I don't think so. I don't believe we're going to be seeing pro players busting out Jin Gitaxias Progress Tyrant. I could be wrong on that, but I don't expect it to see play outside of janky brews and Commander. But in janky brews and Commander, this card is going to be awesome. Also in Commander, I would highly recommend you put him in the 99, because this in your command zone would definitely be a middle finger to your opponents. And well, actually, it's a 7-drop though. It's also important to note in multiplayer games, however, that whenever an opponent casts an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, you counter that spell. The ability triggers only once each turn, not once per player. So if you are in a multiplayer environment, the card becomes significantly less powerful. But it is still a good stacks piece. It is still a decent stacks piece that can slow people down dramatically, and it forces your opponents to work together, because one person has to take that counter for the team, and another person has to have a follow-up for it if the one person doesn't have 2 follow-ups. But at the same time, at its face, unless your opponent is running removal that happens to be creatures, of which there are plenty, like even in Standard right now, we have Sigrid and Brutal Cathar that are capable of hitting Jin, that would not get countered by its ability. So that's a bummer for sure. But if your opponent tries to hit it with an Infernal Grasp, it just gets countered. And so your opponent would have to have 2 removal spells in order to hit it, which I love. I think that it's a good design. Like I said, it gives everyone an out. I think it's a cool card. I think it's a cool piece of... It's a cool thing. It's also Phyrexian Praetor. Who doesn't love Phyrexian Praetors, right? I know I do. Mostly because I love reanimation strategies. And there are few targets that are quite as appealing to reanimate than Phyrexian Praetors, in my experience. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging out. This has been another Overthinking MTG. I appreciate you. There's more of these coming about Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, so keep your eyes on the channel. If you are currently not subscribed to the channel, please do so. It actually helps out dramatically. And thank you for making it all the way to the end. I appreciate it very, very much. If you're listening to this as a podcast, which, by the way, it is available as a podcast if you're watching on YouTube, and it's available on YouTube if you're listening on a podcast. Anyway, it's available in all the places. If you wouldn't mind giving a review and smashing that thumbs up, I'd appreciate it very, very much. Thank you. I think I'm going to go sip some tea and rest my voice a little bit. Y'all are amazing, and I'll catch you on the next one.